On Christmas Eve 1992, a teenage girl looked at her companions and said, "Let's get some drama in our lives." Within 72 hours, 6 people would be gone. Their families would never celebrate the holiday again, and a city would learn that the season of light can become the darkest chapter in its history. This is a true story. This is the Dayton Christmas tragedy of 1992. Before we begin, I want to ask something of you. We're a small channel trying to reach 100 subscribers, and your support means everything. If you're listening to this in the middle of the night, on your commute, or wherever darkness finds you, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories reach, how far the truth travels. Now, if cases like this one stay with you, if you believe that remembering the lost matters, then subscribe, because the files I open here don't close easily, and tonight's may be one you carry with you long after the screen goes dark. We're hoping for 20 likes on this video, 20 people willing to say they bore witness to what happened in Dayton that Christmas. If this story moves you, if it makes you think, click that like button. It helps more people find these forgotten cases, more people remember. Now let me tell you about Christmas 1992 in Dayton, Ohio. Every city has a heartbeat. In December, that heartbeat quickens with something close to joy. Lights appear on storefronts, families plan gatherings, children press their faces against frosted windows, waiting. Dayton was no different. It was a working-class city, a place where people knew their neighbors, where General Motors provided paychecks and stability, where the holiday season meant potluck dinners and church services, and the kind of ordinary happiness that doesn't make headlines. But in the days leading up to Christmas 1992, something else was stirring. Downtown, at Courthouse Square, a group of young people had begun gathering. They called themselves the Downtown Posse. 4 individuals, none older than 20, all of them estranged from family, from convention, from the normal anchors that keep people tethered to civilized life. They spent their days asking strangers for change, their nights planning something darker. The ringleader was a 19-year-old named Marvelous Keene. Remember that name. By the time this story ends, it will be etched in the history of American capital punishment in a way that still makes people uncomfortable. But in December 1992, he was simply a damaged young man with a void where his future should have been. Keene was born on July 5, 1973. His childhood reads like so many others that end in tragedy. His father left when he was young. A stepfather came and went, offering no stability, no model of manhood worth following. But the wound that never healed, the one that perhaps set everything in motion, came in 1991. Keene's older brother Maurice was taken from him during an armed robbery attempt. Shot. Gone. Just like that. Grief does strange things to people. Some turn inward, some turn to faith. Marvelous Keene turned to rage. After his brother's passing, Keene tried to reconnect with his father in California. It didn't work. The man who should have been there never was. Then his grandmother passed. Another loss. Another person who might have pulled him back from the edge. Gone. By November 1992, Keene returned to Dayton carrying an emptiness that no amount of anger could fill. Within weeks, he had assembled the Downtown Posse. His girlfriend was 16-year-old Laura Taylor, a runaway with a taste for chaos. It was Taylor who reportedly said it first, that phrase that would echo through courtrooms and family testimonies for years to come. Let's get some drama in our lives. As if drama were something to seek, as if violence were entertainment, as if other people's lives were props in a performance only they could see. Then there was Heather Matthews, 20 years old, the other adult in this group, and her boyfriend, DeMarcus Smith, just 17. 4 people. 4 damaged souls who found each other in the worst possible way. They were predators. A police sergeant would later say, like sharks that had tasted blood and couldn't stop. But on December 24, 1992, they hadn't tasted anything yet. Christmas Eve arrived the way it always does, with anticipation. Children counting hours, adults wrapping presents, churches preparing for midnight services. Joseph Wilkerson, a 34-year-old General Motors worker, was likely thinking about the holiday, about rest, about the small pleasures of a few days away from the factory floor. Wilkerson knew Laura Taylor. Not well, but enough. When she approached him that evening with Keene and Matthews, Suggesting a liaison of sorts, he had no reason to suspect what was coming. Why would he? It was Christmas Eve. People are supposed to be better on Christmas Eve. They entered his home on Prescott Avenue. Once inside, everything changed. Guns appeared. Wilkerson found himself bound to his own bed with electrical cords, the kind of improvised restraint that speaks to both desperation and cruelty. While Taylor and Matthews moved through his house, taking whatever seemed valuable, Keene stood over him. Wilkerson must have known then. Must have understood that this wasn't just robbery. You don't tie someone up if you're planning to leave them alive to identify you. Keene shot him in the chest with a .32 caliber Derringer. They placed blankets over the body to muffle the sound. Then Taylor fired a round into his head, just to be sure, just to make certain that Joseph Wilkerson would never see Christmas morning. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. They didn't leave. They stayed in Joseph Wilkerson's house for 3 days, eating his food, driving his cars, celebrating their own twisted version of the holiday while his body decomposed in a nearby bedroom. Imagine that. Imagine the kind of disconnect from humanity required to party in a house with a corpse. To sit in a room knowing that just beyond the wall someone you ended lies growing cold. That same evening, December 24th, they were joined by DeMarcus Smith, and they decided they needed more. More money. More of whatever it was they thought violence could provide. At a payphone outside a neighborhood market, they encountered 18-year-old Danita Gillette. She was a high school senior, working part-time at a fast food restaurant, trying to build something resembling a future. She had a 2-year-old daughter waiting for her at home, a little girl who would spend the rest of her life without a mother, who would grow up hearing stories about the woman who gave her life, but would never remember her face without photographs. They approached Gillette with guns drawn, made her remove her shoes. Then Smith and Keene shot her multiple times. They took her shoes and jacket, items worth maybe $20. They had taken a life for the price of a cheap meal. Danita Gillette lay there on Christmas Eve, her blood pooling on cold pavement, her final words, according to later testimony, a simple plea. "Don't shoot me." She said, "Don't shoot me." She gave them everything she had, and they shot her anyway. Her sister Rhonda would carry that moment for the rest of her life, would testify years later that she could never enjoy Christmas the way other people do. How could she? Every decoration, every carol, every family gathering would be haunted by the image of Danita at that payphone, begging for a mercy that never came. If you're still with me, if this story is reaching you wherever you are in the world, I want you to do something. Share this video. Not because it's easy to watch, but because Danita Gillette deserves to be remembered. Because her sister Rhonda is still living with this pain. Because forgetting these victims means the violence won. Share it with someone who believes that remembering matters. That night or early the next morning, the exact timeline is a little unclear, Smith shot Jeffrey Wright 4 times in the legs outside an apartment. Wright was Matthews's ex-boyfriend. Maybe there was jealousy involved. Maybe it was simply practice. Wright managed to escape to a neighbor's house. He survived. He was one of the lucky ones, if you can call carrying 4 bullet wounds lucky. Christmas Day arrived, December 25th, 1992. In homes across Dayton, across America, children were opening presents. Families were gathering. It was supposed to be the best day of the year. Laura Taylor called her ex-boyfriend, 19-year-old Richmond Maddox. She asked him to pick her up. There's no record of what she said to convince him, what pretense she used. But Maddox left his parents' home and got into his car with Taylor beside him. As he drove, he started to feel something was wrong. Maybe he noticed they were being followed. Maybe Taylor's demeanor shifted. We'll never know exactly what warning signs flickered in his mind in those final moments. Taylor placed her Derringer pistol against his right temple and fired once. Richmond Maddox died instantly. The car crashed on Benton Avenue. Taylor walked away and rejoined her companions. Another life extinguished. Another family's Christmas destroyed forever. Think about Richmond Maddox's parents. Imagine waiting for your son to come home on Christmas Day. Imagine the hours passing, the worry building, then the knock on the door. The police. The worst news in the world delivered on the day you're supposed to celebrate life. By December 26th, the gang was desperate for money. They had burned through whatever they'd taken from their victims, and desperation makes dangerous people even more dangerous. In the early morning hours, they targeted a grocery store owned by a family whose matriarch, Sarah Abraham, was working behind the register. She was 38 years old, a mother of 3. Her oldest child was 11. She was doing what millions of Americans do, working to provide for her family, probably counting down the hours until she could go home and see her children. Taylor entered first to scout the location. She reported back on the layout the exits where Abraham was standing. Then Keene and Smith entered with guns drawn. Sarah Abraham did exactly what you're supposed to do in a robbery. She complied. She handed over $40, everything in the register. She didn't resist, didn't fight, didn't do anything except exactly what they asked. Keene shot her twice in the head anyway. At the same moment, Smith fired at store helper Edward Thompson and customer Jones Pettis. Thompson wasn't hit. Pettis took a round to the abdomen. Sarah Abraham was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. She held on for 4 days. 4 days of machines and prayers, and her children waiting to hear if their mother would survive. She didn't. She passed on December 30th, 1992. 3 children, the oldest just 11 years old, were left without a mother. Not because she did anything wrong. Not because she fought back or tried to be a hero. She died because she was there. Because $40 wasn't enough to satisfy whatever black hole existed where Keene's conscience should have been. Before we continue, I need to say something. If you're finding value in this channel, if you believe in preserving these stories and honoring these victims, subscribe. We're trying to reach 100 subscribers, and every single one matters. Every subscription tells me that someone out there cares about the same things I do, that truth matters, that remembering the lost matters. Now, let me tell you about the paranoia that set in. Because by December 26th, Keene and his companions had left a trail of devastation across Dayton, 6 people shot, 2 fighting for their lives, and they started to worry about witnesses. 2 young people, 16-year-old Wendy Cottrell and 18-year-old Marvin Washington, were acquaintances of the gang. They knew things. They had been around. They had seen things. And in Keene's mind, that made them threats. Here's what you need to understand. Cottrell and Washington hadn't gone to the police. They hadn't threatened to talk. They were just kids who happened to know too much. Cottrell was 3 months pregnant. She was carrying a life inside her. Washington was 18, barely an adult, his whole future ahead of him. The gang lured them to a gravel pit outside Dayton under the pretense of hanging out. Just friends getting together. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. They probably thought they were safe. Probably thought that being cooperative, being cool would keep them alive. Once at the gravel pit, Keene and Smith forced them from the car at gunpoint. Cottrell and Washington protested. They said they hadn't talked to police, hadn't planned to. Whatever Keene thought they might do, they promised they wouldn't. They begged for their lives. Keene shot Cottrell. Smith shot Washington. 2 more bodies. 2 more families who would spend days wondering where their children were. Who would imagine scenarios, hold on to hope, pray for a miracle that would never come. The bodies lay in that gravel pit for 5 days before anyone found them. 5 days of their families searching, calling friends, checking hospitals, doing everything desperate parents do when their child disappears. And here's something that will stay with me. Wendy Cottrell was pregnant. When Keene pulled that trigger, he didn't just end 1 life, he ended 2. A 16-year-old girl and the child she was carrying. Think about that. Let it sink in. 2 futures, 2 possibilities, erased because of paranoia and a total absence of empathy. The gang's reign of terror ended on December 26th, the same day they took their final victims. An anonymous tip reached police. Someone had seen something, known something, had the courage to make that call. Officers spotted the gang in a stolen vehicle behaving suspiciously. A pursuit began. DeMarcus Smith fled on foot and was quickly apprehended. Keene, Matthews, and Taylor were arrested as they attempted to leave a friend's house. 2 firearms were recovered from the vehicle. Police had been operating on reduced holiday staffing, which probably delayed the response. If there had been normal numbers on patrol, maybe some of these victims would still be alive. Maybe the gang would have been caught after 2 victims instead of 6. We'll never know. What we do know is that Detective Doyle Burke and Sergeant George Hammond led the investigation. And when they discovered Joseph Wilkerson's decomposed body at his home on Prescott Avenue, still bound to the bed where he died, The full scope of what had happened began to crystallize. The Downtown Posse, 4 young people, 72 hours, 6 lives taken, 2 more people wounded, and a community forever changed. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated by the ages of the defendants. Keene and Matthews were adults, Taylor and Smith were juveniles. That distinction would determine everything about how they were charged and sentenced. Marvelous Keene faced the most serious charges. The prosecution sought the ultimate penalty, capital punishment. They wanted him to face the same finality his victims had faced. October 12, 1993, a 3-judge panel led by Judge Robert Brown found the 20-year-old guilty on all 20 counts. 5 counts of aggravated taking of life, aggravated burglary, attempted aggravated harm, kidnapping, aggravated robbery. During the sentencing hearing, Keene cried. He apologized. He talked about his brother's passing, about his father's absence, about the losses that had accumulated in his young life until they crushed whatever humanity he might have possessed. He was asking for understanding, for mitigation, for mercy. The judges were unmoved, and maybe that seems harsh. Maybe some of you listening think everyone deserves compassion. But consider this. Did Joseph Wilkerson receive mercy when he was bound to his bed? Did Danita Gillette receive compassion when she begged not to be shot? Did Sarah Abraham's compliance save her? Did Wendy Cottrell's pregnancy matter to the person who ended her? On October 28, 1993, the court imposed 5 death sentences, 1 for each taking of life. On December 10, 1993, the formal sentencing occurred. Keene also received consecutive sentences ranging between 121 and 293 years for the lesser charges. Montgomery County Assistant Prosecutor Angela Friedman stated that Keene's sentence symbolized the judiciary's commitment to protect society. Heather Matthews, the other adult, negotiated a plea bargain. The prosecution agreed to drop the death penalty. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms with a minimum of 53 years before parole eligibility, plus an additional 194 years for other charges. She would be an old woman before she ever had a chance at freedom, if she lived that long. Laura Taylor and DeMarcus Smith, being juveniles at the time, could not receive capital punishment. But in May 1993, a judge determined they could not be rehabilitated within the juvenile system and ordered them tried as adults. Taylor was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for Wilkerson and Abraham, plus an additional 15 years to life for Maddox's demise, totaling 145 years to life. Smith received a similar sentence, life imprisonment with parole ineligibility lasting more than 100 years. 4 young people, 4 lives essentially over. Some would say that's justice. Others would ask, what could have prevented this? What intervention, what support, what different choices might have redirected these young people before they became something monstrous? I don't have those answers. Nobody does. Keene spent the next 16 years appealing his sentence. His lawyers argued that the prosecution's decision to seek capital punishment against him was racially motivated. They pointed out that co-defendant Heather Matthews, who was white, received a plea deal while Keene, who was African American, faced execution. They cited statistics showing that African Americans comprised 49% of Ohio's death row population, despite being only 9% of the state's population. These are uncomfortable numbers. They raise questions about systemic bias, about who receives mercy in our justice system and who doesn't. But the Ohio Supreme Court in 1998 and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2008 rejected these arguments. They noted that Keene had personally pulled the trigger in most of the incidents, while Matthews's direct involvement was lesser and more ambiguous. Was that the whole truth? Was that fair? I can't tell you. The justice system made its determination. Whether it was the right one is something each of us has to decide for ourselves. On May 6, 2009, the Ohio Supreme Court approved an execution date for Keene. The parole board held a clemency hearing. Rhonda Gillette, Danita's sister, represented 15 families of Keene's victims. Think about that. 15 families. 15 groups of people whose lives had been shattered by 72 hours of violence 17 years earlier. Keene refused to submit any evidence in mitigation. He said he didn't want to prolong the victims' families' pain. The board unanimously voted 7-0 to recommend against clemency. They found that Keene had taken lives in a cold and calculated manner that did not warrant mercy. Governor Ted Strickland agreed and denied clemency, July 21, 2009. The Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville. Marvelous Keene, now 36 years old, was executed by lethal injection. He became the 1,000th person executed by lethal injection in the United States since the practice resumed in 1982. 1,000. A grim milestone. A historical marker that says something about America, about justice, about vengeance, about how we respond to the worst among us. Keene's execution made headlines not just because of what he had done, but because of what he represented. The 1,000th, a number, a statistic, a symbol. Before the execution, Keene ordered a final meal. Porterhouse steak with A1 sauce, fried jumbo shrimp, French fries, onion rings, Pillsbury dinner rolls, a mango, plums, white seedless grapes, German chocolate cake, 2 bottles each of Pepsi and A&W cream soda. It was an extravagant list, the kind of meal someone might order if they knew it was their last, if they wanted to taste everything one more time. When asked for final words, Keene responded, "No, I have no words, no words." After all the testimony, all the appeals, all the years of fighting for his life, in the end he had nothing to say. No final apology, no explanation, no attempt at meaning. Just silence. Some might see that as defiant. Others might see it as exhausted. Maybe after 16 years of appeals and hearings and lawyers arguing over your life, there simply aren't any words left that matter. As of 2025, the other 3 members of the Downtown Posse remain incarcerated. Heather Matthews is held at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. According to reports, she has become something of a mentor figure among inmates, volunteering for art projects and serving as a Stephen minister. She's trying to be a different person than the 20-year-old who participated in 6 deaths. Whether that's genuine rehabilitation or performance, I can't say. Maybe it's both. Laura Taylor is incarcerated at the Dayton Correctional Institution. She was scheduled for parole eligibility hearings beginning in 2021, with her next hearing set for October 2026. The state continues to oppose her release. She was 16 when this happened. 16. An age where most of us were worried about grades and first relationships and what we'd do after high school. She was participating in a spree that destroyed families. DeMarcus Smith remains in the North Central Correctional Institution. As a juvenile offender, he was eligible for parole consideration as of January 2025, though his next parole hearing was scheduled for 2034. He was 17. Just 17. Old enough to know better. Young enough that maybe he could have been something different. But here's what haunts me about this case. It's not just the violence. It's the timing. Christmas. The one time of year when we're supposed to be better. When we're supposed to remember that we're all connected, all human, all deserving of compassion and peace. The 1992 Dayton Christmas tragedy destroyed that for so many people. Rhonda Goulet, Danita's sister, reported in 2019, 27 years after her sister's passing, that she still cannot celebrate Christmas like other families. Every decoration triggers memories. Every carol reminds her of loss. The holiday season brings only the image of her sister at that payphone, begging for her life. And it gets worse. Danita's mother grieved so profoundly that she passed away at age 51 in 1998. Her other children attributed her passing to grief so overwhelming it became fatal. She died of a broken heart. That's not metaphor. That's medical reality. Grief can overwhelm the body's systems. Stress can accumulate until it becomes lethal. Danita's mother loved her daughter so much that losing her eventually meant losing herself. Rhonda's engagement was broken in the years following her sister's fate. She experienced the loss of a child. The ripple effects of these acts of violence touched multiple generations of families. Children who lost parents, parents who lost children, siblings who lost each other, relationships that fractured under the weight of trauma, futures that never happened because the past was too heavy to carry forward. Joseph Wilkerson's family lost a provider, a brother, a son. Richmond Maddox's parents buried their 19-year-old on what should have been a season of celebration. Sarah Abraham's 3 children grew up without their mother. Wendy Cottrell's family mourned both her and the grandchild they would never meet. Marvin Washington's potential, whatever he might have become, ended in a gravel pit at 18. In 2017, Oxygen aired a documentary titled 6 Sleighs of Christmas as part of its Homicide for the Holidays series. The case became part of the national true crime discourse. In 2018, the Dayton Police History Foundation published a comprehensive book, The Christmas Killings 40 Hours to Justice, Black and White, documenting the case in detail. These attempts to understand, to process, to find meaning in the senseless are part of how we cope. We tell the stories, we document the facts. We try to make sense of how 4 young people could create so much destruction in such a short time. But maybe there is no sense to be made. Maybe some acts are simply evil. Maybe trauma and loss and abandonment can explain part of what happened, but they don't excuse it. Maybe Marvelous Keen's brother's passing wounded him deeply, but millions of people lose siblings and don't become predators. Maybe Laura Taylor was troubled, but being troubled doesn't give you permission to take lives. We want explanations. We want to understand why. Because if we can understand why, maybe we can prevent it from happening again. Maybe we can identify the warning signs, intervene earlier, save lives before they're lost. But sometimes the why doesn't matter as much as the what. And what happened in Dayton over Christmas 1992 was the destruction of innocence on a scale that city had never seen. 6 people who should be alive today. 6 families who should still be whole. 1 community that should remember Christmas as a time of joy instead of a reminder of its darkest chapter. If you've stayed with me until now, if you've heard these stories and felt something, I want you to do one more thing. Hit that like button, leave a comment. Tell me what you think about cases like this. Tell me if remembering matters to you, because that's what this channel is about. Remembering. Bearing witness, refusing to let these victims fade into statistics. The Midnight File isn't just about solving mysteries, it's about honoring the lost. It's about acknowledging that every victim was a person with dreams and fears, and people who loved them. Joseph Wilkerson wasn't just a body in a house. He was a General Motors worker who showed up every day, who probably had friends at the plant, who had routines and favorite foods and songs he hummed while working. Danita Gillette wasn't just a statistic. She was an 18-year-old mother trying to build a future for her daughter, working in fast food and going to school, and probably exhausted most of the time but still showing up, still trying. Sarah Abraham wasn't just a victim. She was a mother of 3 who worked behind a register to provide for her family, who probably knew her regular customers by name, who deserved to go home that night. Richmond Maddox was 19 years old. Think about who you were at 19. Think about all the mistakes you made, all the lessons you learned, all the growing you did in the years after. He never got those years, never got to become whoever he might have been. Wendy Cottrell was 16 and pregnant. She was scared, probably. 16 and pregnant and trying to figure out what her life would look like. And some part of her must have been excited too, because even unplanned pregnancies can bring joy, can make you imagine the future in new ways. She never got to meet her child, never got to hold that baby, never got to discover who she would become as a mother. Marvin Washington was 18, barely out of high school. Maybe he had college plans. Maybe he had a job lined up. Maybe he was just trying to figure things out the way 18-year-olds do. He knew the wrong people. He was in the wrong place, and it cost him everything. These are the people we remember. These are the lives that mattered. Not Marvelous Keen, not the 1,000 executions he symbolized, not the legal arguments or the statistics or the debates about capital punishment and racial bias. Those things matter in their own way, but they're not what this story is about. This story is about 6 people who should be here and aren't. About families who never recovered. About a community that learned the hard way that darkness doesn't take holidays. That violence doesn't care about Christmas lights or carols or the supposed spirit of the season. Every town keeps a secret. Some just bury it deeper than others. Dayton buried 6 of its own in December 1992. And every year when the lights go up, when the carols play, when families gather, there are people in that city who remember, who can't forget. who see ghosts at every holiday table. If cases like this stay with you, if you believe that bearing witness matters, then stay with this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the files I open don't close easily, because the truth deserves to be remembered, because every victim deserves a voice, even years after they've been silenced. The 1992 Dayton Christmas tragedy reminds us that evil doesn't announce itself with horns and pitchforks. Sometimes it looks like 4 young people at Courthouse Square asking for change. Sometimes it sounds like a teenage girl saying, "Let's get some drama in our lives." Sometimes it happens over 3 days when everyone else is celebrating. And sometimes the only thing we can do, the only way we can honor those who were lost, is to remember, to tell their stories, to refuse to let them become footnotes in history books or statistics in crime databases. So here's my question for you. What do you do with stories like this? How do you carry them? Because if you've listened this far, you're carrying it now. You know their names. Joseph Wilkerson, Danita Gillette, Richmond Maddox, Sarah Abraham, Wendy Cottrell, Marvin Washington. 6 names, 6 lives, 6 families still grieving decades later. Don't let them be forgotten. Share this video. Talk about it. Think about what it means that 4 people could create so much destruction in such a short time. Think about what warning signs we miss, what interventions we fail to make, what responsibilities we have to each other. The Midnight File is about more than true crime. It's about understanding how fragile civilization really is, how quickly peace can shatter, how much we depend on each other, choosing every single day to be decent, to be kind, to value life. Most people make that choice. Most of us wake up and go to work and love our families and try to do right by our neighbors. But sometimes someone doesn't. Sometimes 4 people decide that their wants matter more than other people's lives, and the consequences ripple outward, touching everyone, changing everything. Dayton learned that lesson at Christmas. So did the families of those 6 victims. So did everyone who heard this story when it happened and has carried it ever since. Now you know it too. The question is, what will you do with it? Will you remember? Will you share? Will you let it change how you think about violence and justice and the value of a single human life? I hope you will. I hope this story stays with you the way it stayed with me. Not because I want you to be haunted, but because being haunted means you still feel something. It means you haven't become numb. It means you recognize that these weren't just cases or statistics or files. They were people, real people, gone too soon, remembered too little. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for caring enough to stay until the end. If you want more stories like this, more files that refuse to be closed, more truths that need to be remembered, then subscribe to the Midnight File. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what you think about this case. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people, helps more victims be remembered, and if you know someone who appreciates true crime done right, done with respect and depth and genuine care for the victims, share this video with them. 20 shares, that's all I'm asking. 20 people willing to pass this story forward. 20 people who believe that remembering matters. Until the next file, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember that behind every case, there are real people with real families who are still living with the consequences. This was the 1992 Dayton Christmas tragedy. 6 lives, 72 hours, and a reminder that the darkest moments don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, on ordinary days, in places we thought were safe. Good night.